Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can have the mindset to get your life and business set.
As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the podcast, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button in iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. If you want to get the inside info for this and every episode, as well as some free gifts, go to illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. And now let's dive in to get your mindset for your life and business set.
We'll talk about author, speaker, coach, and amazing miracle worker, Stephanie McAuliffe, in just a bit. But before we do that, Nick, how is your week going?
Well, it's turned around.
It's turned around. What does that mean? It's Monday, so I guess it's like we're getting the ground running.
No, it's good. I had a good week. I missed you. You were away in New York. How was your trip to New York?
My trip to New York. Yeah, I know we're both going to spend time in New York, but I have a bit of a sanctuary there. Mm-hmm. And I know it can be a little bit tricky when I get up and leave and I'm like doing all these fun things, but a lot of thinking and writing and creating in New York City. So New York City was amazing. As always, I am kind of in love with the city and the struggle that comes along with it, which is kind of a strange thing to say, but I guess that will be revealed as we go on through this year.
Just so I know, it's like the struggle of the city or the struggle of being in the city?
I feel like it's the struggle that people go through to be in the city and just how transparent, how real they are. I just love New Yorkers. You all it takes is to be transparent and you get direct answers and they're amazing. And they move, man. It's like root chakra city. Mm-hmm. They are in motion. Everyone's walking, everyone's doing. It's not like blissed out SoCal.
Yeah.
It is way different.
Yeah, it's different. It's a different vibe for sure. I'm excited to spend some time there.
Yeah, we'll be going there in a few weeks.
So today, this is an exciting episode.
Today is an exciting episode. Yeah. We're going to talk with Stephanie about something that is, I know, very true, raw, and real for many, many people. Definitely had many conversations with some of my family members about this topic. And let's just bring her on. Stephanie, welcome to Illumination Podcast. And we are so excited to have you here.
Hi, thank you. And I am incredibly excited to be here as well with both of you.
Yeah. And you're coming to us from New Jersey.
Yes.
And you have a new book out. And I would like to just start off talking about the book. And then I know there's going to be so many little stories and insights that come out from that. So could you just tell our listeners about Message in a Bottle and what that means to you?
Yes. So the message in the bottle and the subtitle says a lot: finding hope and peace amidst the chaos of living with an alcoholic. So I am the fourth generation of women in my family who have been affected by growing up and or living around alcoholism. And it's something that often carries through in us, sometimes without realizing it. And when I was married to my second husband, I was brought to my knees. And that was when I started to climb out of my own pit. Mm-hmm. And I saw how so many people struggle with this on their own. And this book is my gift to people who are trying to work through this on their own. Mm-hmm. And I share many of the tools that I had to hunt for. Mm-hmm. I don't want anyone to ever feel as alone as I did or to have to struggle the way I did to find peace and joy for themselves.
And just to be really clear, this is about your struggle as being married or close to an alcoholic and what that did to you.
Yes. As well as growing up around people who had been affected by alcoholism. And quite often with that comes lack of communication and lack of support. Mm-hmm. There was also abuse that I experienced, and not being able to talk about these things creates a ripple effect that I carried through into my adult life that I tried to ignore, I ran from, until I really came to the point where I couldn't anymore and I had to turn around and face myself. Yeah. And that was when I really began to heal.
Well, this is such an important topic, message, share, because we all know there's a great deal of attention and focus on alcoholism, on addiction, on the people that go through this, suffer from this. There's so much out there that is being taught and shared, etc. And it's like the people that have been in those lives, they kind of got bypassed. Does that feel like like that was happening? Like no one really saw what was going on in you, including perhaps yourself?
Oh, absolutely. And while I was going through a lot of this, I was also working on Wall Street. And one of the last things I could let anybody see, when I was working on Wall Street, I used to be proud of the statement of, I believed in separation of church and state, because I couldn't let anyone at work know what was happening in my personal life. Because quite often that might mean not getting a project or promotion. I was working in a very stressful job and company. And really, there's such a stigma that's associated with living around this disease as if it's, you've done something wrong yourself. When really all we've done is love someone who has an addiction.
Is that stigma from the internal, or was it felt from external sources as well?
Oh, both. Internally, because quite often with my second husband, when he would do his thing and his drinking, quite often I didn't want to be around him. And if we were socializing with people, it was embarrassing to me. And then also friends would distance themselves. So it is a real thing that you do become isolated. Yeah. However, if we were to compare this to someone who has cancer, you wouldn't isolate yourself. Now, granted, someone with cancer doesn't often act out and do things because of a substance they're consuming. So there are additional factors. However, I have seen that it is both an internal and an external struggle. And I see that also with the clients that I work with and people I talk to as well.
Can you tell me a little bit about the moment that you knew that something needed to change?
I ended up in the hospital with my own second heart attack scare, and he did not visit me. I don't think physically or mentally he was capable because of the stage of his alcoholism. But I laid alone in a hospital bed with my BlackBerry in my hand because I was still working on Wall Street and I still had an $85 million program that I was managing. And I know, it's crazy. And I thought to myself, what am I doing? This is either going to kill him or it's going to kill me. And it's time for me to finally choose myself.
That took some courage and really vulnerability.
Oh, a lot. And I didn't realize how much I had been ignoring or burying until I started to look at it. And I think that's part of the reason why sometimes people don't go there. We try to ignore, we try to deny what's really happening, yet it will continue to follow us almost like Eeyore's shadow or his rain cloud from Winnie the Pooh. It will continue to be behind us. And so we can pretend that we're not living this life or we haven't grown up around this or it hasn't affected us in a myriad of ways, yet it's always there. So it's really turning around and saying, all right, what are the gifts that are here for me? What were the lessons that are here for me to learn? What's been there all along? And how can I take something that has really been hurtful and make it something positive for myself?
Right. Those gems of wisdom that always come when we're able to examine the past without blame, without shame, without guilt. I love that. One question for you, especially being a woman in this situation, as you observed your husband drinking, going deeper into this addiction, this disease, did you notice a time where it went from he can manage this to this is not manageable?
Yes. And it was a slow progression, which alcoholism typically is. When we could no longer share just a glass of wine over dinner, it had to be more was consumed. And it was quite often that I was coming home and he had already started drinking. It wasn't something where I came home, we sat down, we might open a bottle of wine and have a glass while we had dinner. Quite often he was already bouncing off the stove. And I would try to talk with him about it. I've now come to know that you really can't, talk with them about it. This is something that they need to want to do for themselves. And even with ultimatums, all it did was prolong both of our pain, actually, because when I gave him an ultimatum to go into rehab or move out, he went to rehab. And then we continued to dance around each other for another year and a half. But there did seem to be that moment when he started to have some personal and professional struggles. And that was when he turned more to the bottle.
Yeah, it's interesting how I've had another friend of mine who her husband was an alcoholic for many years, and I knew them in a different context, and it was from the outside looking in. I don't know that I really spotted it the way that it did, but as the stories started to come out more and more, you realize like, wow, there's really a lot going on below the surface there that nobody would have ever seen. And including the person who was addicted in the situation was really stuck in that. And I to this day, I know that those two are no longer together, but I don't know that person, he's actually changed in the situation. So it's really interesting. I think you make a really good point about that person wanting the change and how absolutely critical that is. Is there anything that you can do to help guide them in that direction, or do you really just have to let go?
Not enable them. One of the patterns that we get in is because when we're married or we're in a partnership with someone, we want to help them if they're not doing well. Unfortunately, alcoholism and any kind of addiction, it's a very narcissistic disease, and it becomes all about the alcohol or drug of choice. And quite often, and especially I think for those of us who grew up around alcoholism, there is the term codependency, and we get so sucked into, well, if I can do this for them, then they won't want to drink and things will be perfect. And I did that actually with both of my alcoholic husbands. I didn't do it once. I did it twice. It took me a couple times to finally come out of my old pattern.
Well, just to be sure, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and quite often we take on a lot of the same in AA and Al-Anon, they call them isms. And we take on a lot of the same isms that the alcoholic has because we get just as drawn into the disease. We're just not drinking.
Right.
Can you share a little bit about that? An example of what one of those isms would be?
Perfectionism, lack of communication. There's a lot of denial as well with alcoholism.
Yeah.
Because if I don't want to admit that you can't handle your alcohol and you're not admitting that you can't handle your alcohol, we're just going to put this veneer over everything.
Yeah. So it becomes a joint denial.
Absolutely. And the denial is really, really thick sometimes. And so I think, Nick, that's why, you didn't see this in your friends. Because first of all, we don't want to admit it to ourselves. We don't want to admit it to our partner. And we certainly don't want to admit it to anybody outside of the four walls that we're living in.
It sounds like then it really is the biggest and most necessary step for the person who's in the relationship with the addict is about owning that themselves.
Yes.
And then from there, the rest, who knows how that's going to look, but the path can reveal itself after that. But as long as you're party to that, then you're going to be part of the problem and keeping it stuck as well. And
we get pulled down with it. Hence me being in a hospital bed alone after a second heart attack scare because of the stress. Now, granted, some of the stress was also because of work. That may have been 30% of it, though. A lot of it really was home. When you don't know what it is you're going to walk into, when you don't know what their mood is going to be, when you know they're out drinking and driving, and you're worried that are they going to hit somebody? Are they going to kill somebody? Are they going to end up in a ditch? Are you going to lose your home? there's an incredible amount of stress that runs through your body. And that's what causes physical illness.
Yeah, it's caustic.
Yeah.
It's basically like eating poison. Now, I know a lot of people, I'm not one of these people, but this is something that I've heard a lot, is that, okay, well, you see the warning signs, you know this, you're carrying around this level of stress and anxiety. Why don't you just leave? Can you talk a little bit more about, I don't know, it just sounds like
especially from a woman's perspective.
Yeah, right. Especially from a woman's perspective about how that bind gets formed and what are some of the things that keep you in that dance.
One of the hardest things to do when you're married to an alcoholic is to let go. Even when my divorce was final from my second husband, I still loved him. It was with him I was finally able to separate the person from the disease, and I couldn't live with the disease anymore. Yet when I found that I was doing more for him than he was for himself, and I was doing more for him than I was for myself, that was really that hospital bed moment of, I'm either going to live my life or I'm going to be dead.
Yeah, that's a really strong metric. That's a really strong metric to do. I know in your work, Stephanie, you talk about, and we're energy people too, and I know you are, and you talk about changing the energy of the past stories, like that paradigm shift. And of course, we've heard again and again with alcoholics how there can be shame and guilt and all of those energetic presences. And for the people that live with them, those occur as well. So can you speak a little bit about your work and how you work with women and changing that story?
Yes, I would love to. One of the things that I found, and this is even with the alcoholics and those of us who love them, quite often there are demons, struggles, trauma, chaos that come from early childhood that is not resolved. And that is often the reason for diving into numbing our pain. So my jobs had to get bigger and more stressful because once I achieved something, I went on to the next big project, the next big job, because I always needed something else. I looked for things outside of myself to fill an emptiness that I didn't have within. The work that I do with my clients is uncovering some of those old patterns. What we really do is get ourselves into an observer mode and looking at some of the situations, the patterns, getting the things out of our day-to-day lives that keep us from paying attention to what's really going on.
It's like being the witness, right?
It is. Because when we can bring ourselves into an observer mode, it removes us from the emotions of the situation and it becomes less triggering.
Right.
And when my clients can look at a situation from that observer mode, it's like you're sitting above it.
Yes.
And you're looking down on it. Yes. It just changes the whole dynamic. And then you can look at it more objectively and then look at what is the gift that's here for me? I have a client right now I'm working with who has an old pattern of isolation. Well, when she was a child and her father was getting drunk and her mother would go on her rages, isolating herself made her safe. And she carried that pattern into her adult life. Once she saw what it was, she's now walking into family situations, saying what she needs to say from a place of love and respect. She's no longer triggered, and she's not getting pulled back into the old dynamic because her parents have not changed, but she has, and she has a new way of approaching her day-to-day life.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I mean, we talk a lot about when we change the energy in us, it changes the energy in a relationship. It changes the energy in the other people that we're communicating with. And so it really does go back to anchor that it will be the work we do on ourselves that is most important.
Always.
Oh, I love that.
Well, you also bring up another really interesting point, I think, around the addictive patterns of the mind. So and there is a multi-layered approach here. I think that's really appropriate because you can clean up the energy all day long and work on people's guilt and shame and all the things around that all day long. And their mind, if it chooses to continue to engage in those same patterns in the same ways, will tend to recreate those things. So it's like there's like a two-step approach to that as far as solving energetically what's going on and getting that part of it cleaned up. And also helping them to find a new way to do that, which I think personally for me, and I'm curious to hear like your experiences about this, working with people on the level of the mind and their and addictive patterns and things like that, is like that's really the painstaking part, to make the continual choices. It's not just one yes or that, but it's a yes after yes after yes, or choice after choice after choice to see that pattern through and to really integrate something new. Can you talk a little bit about that in the context of your work?
Oh, absolutely. The work that I do with my clients, I call body, mind, and spirit. It is holistic because we need to understand how what we've done has affected us in all aspects of our life. Mm-hmm. Because to your point, if my mind and my heart are in two different places, my mind is always going to win.
Yeah.
Truth.
It's got a lot more training.
Well, it does. And this is where our ego is very comfortable with the way it's lived. And we need our ego. We absolutely need our individual self. However, quite often when we are approaching change, we'll feel resistance. And that is our ego coming up saying, you know what? Nope, things are good the way they are. Even though we're unhappy and we're uncomfortable, we know it. Mm-hmm. And there's a familiarity. And it's actually one of the exercises that I have my clients do, because there are worksheets and videos, but there's also energy work for them to do. And it's to actually have a conversation with their ego and name it. And there's other aspects of this work, but you can have a conversation with her or him, however you name her and identify her. Mine is named Cleo. And if you look up the name Cleo, it has a whole specific Greek root. And it's very interesting to look at why we pick the names we do and whatnot. I'm digressing.
Totally.
And you can say, you know what? I hear you. However, I'm not that 10-year-old girl anymore. And I have a lot more knowledge and wisdom now. Mm-hmm. And I respect you for trying to keep me safe. However, Natasha is now going to be in the driver's seat with me. Mm-hmm. And so this is where we can't just ignore what our mind is telling us. When we give it a voice and we can actually have a conversation and acknowledge what our mind and our ego is trying to say, it quiets it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good. I want to dive a little bit into this just a little bit more, because I think there's a really interesting place here where there's two ends of the spectrum. On the one end of the spectrum, there's the side of just ignore it. Just ignore it. It'll go away. It'll be fine. And then, you get into the happy of it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. The other end of that is where when people do start to listen, and then they get really hooked into that and really stuck in the drama that the mind is creating. So where's that middle ground of being able to really listen, but also not get sucked into the drama of the mind?
This is where I have, my clients, and this is all work that I've done myself as well. First of all, we don't do it by ourselves, because this is part of the reason why so many of us get trapped in the old situation, because we're trying to power our way through. And this isn't anything that we can power through.
Right.
It's also having an acknowledgement of, yes, this is an old pattern. However, I'm creating something new. And as we tap into our heart, we also tap into our intuition. And we can sometimes say, you know what? I don't know where this is going, but that old story is the old story. And this thought may have brought up a feeling. However, if I can let those feelings go, quite often a feeling will flow through us in 15 to 20 seconds and it's gone.
Yep.
Right.
It's a question of what kind of story am I creating around it? When we can get into the place of not creating a story around that feeling and letting it pass, always acknowledging it, it usually leaves. And then it's saying, well, what's the gift here for me? Because if I continue to have the same thing happen to me over and over and over again, this is what the universe will so kindly do for us and give us the same lesson, only slightly different until we finally pay attention. And it's looking at it to say, why do I keep going into this sucky job? Why do I keep having friendships where there's just a lot of drama?
Yeah. Why am I bringing these things in?
Exactly. And it's one of the other things too, is to look at, I love affirmations. However, I think often an affirmation is a mental exercise. And if our heart isn't believing the affirmation we're saying every day, it's something to look at, well, why isn't this happening? Because again, it's a disconnect between the mind and the heart, and it's getting out of the left side of our brain and tapping more into the right.
I love that you said that. I know I have a class on prosperity, and we do certain prosperity commands, but they're designed to be true in terms of how they invoke the divine, etc. Because like you said, affirmations that we're just telling ourselves something that we right now in this moment, we're like, wait, that isn't true. It becomes very confusing. It can fracture the energy.
Absolutely. And I think this is where so many of us are used to powering our way through and thinking that a mantra or an affirmation is, I'm living a prosperous and abundant life, full of joy and harmony. Well, if I'm going home every day to an alcoholic,
it does not feel that way.
No, it doesn't.
Got it.
And so this is where it's really tapping into, how do I really feel? And sometimes it's taking one small step for ourselves. Because quite often too, I think we're taught to create big goals. And when we're working on something for however long, a few weeks, few months, and it doesn't happen, we can become of the mindset of, oh crap, what's the point? It's never going to work.
Right. So all of this work is about getting raw and real.
It is.
And being able to actually put oneself first.
Yes.
And as we know from the highest teachings, we've talked about this in our podcast, there is that teaching where the highest form of service is to seek self-realization, the best we can do on this lifetime, this turn around the planet. And so I feel like this is a message for our listeners, for anyone listening out there that might be in the situation that you've described, where it is really time for them to put themselves first, and it is necessary. And it's not just right for the health of the mind, body, spirit. It's karmically right. And it's right for one's partner who might actually be the alcoholic. So if our listeners want to find you and do some of the reclaiming yourself work, how can they reach you, Stephanie?
The easiest way is to go to my website, which is stephaniebmcauliffe.com. From there, they can click a link to set up just a free discussion. Let's see where you are and see if we have a connection. And I also have a Facebook group that is for anyone who has lived around alcoholism.
Okay, that's great. And your book, Message in a Bottle, we'll make sure that link and your website's on our show notes, but tell us where they can find the book.
They can find the book on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. There are a number of booksellers. It was just released in paperback, which is very exciting to hold your book in your hands.
Are you doing a book tour at all? Are you doing signings or teachings on the book live?
It's in the plan.
Yes, let's make it happen. Let's make it happen. This is a must. I mean, I think it's so important to have that place where people can leave the shame, leave the fear, and know that they're walking into a safe realm.
Yes.
And talking to someone who really knows and understands. Like, this is such important work. And I feel like you're just touching the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much more to do for you and for other people that share your story and your work.
I think one of the important pieces too, like you just said, it is the safety factor of it. I remember another friend of ours who had a community and a radio show that was dedicated to addicts. And she had such a difficult time getting people to just step in. She had a ton of listeners, but people to actually step in and feel safe enough to do that, because it would mean owning a certain part of their life and themselves and their choices that they, they were just either afraid of facing that themselves or afraid that somebody else would find out. And I think that's a big part that just keeps it more and more hidden. And it shows up, in the work that I've done with people. To me, it's just, I can't say it's really shocking, but I never fail to be surprised by what people actually have going on below the surface in their lives. And I know for a fact that this is a common problem. So I guess I just want to throw that number one out to the listeners to say, if you're looking for somebody that understands this and can help you to take that next step, you found them, right? You didn't happen here by accident. You found them, a true expert in that. And then, Stephanie, for you, if you could talk a little bit about that, the safety factor of allowing people into that space and knowing that not only are they in good hands, but their secrets are safe within you and within the community.
Oh, everything is absolutely confidential, because the only way that we can begin to really trust is when we feel safe. And there's so much trust that is lost in our relationships with our alcoholics, because there, as I said, there is the denial, and it wears away at you, almost like water rushing along a bank. For a while, that the dirt just wears away. One of the other things I wanted to say is over 50% of us have been affected by a loved one's alcohol dependency. The statistics are astounding. For those of us who grew up around alcoholism, we're 3 times more likely to become involved with someone with an addiction. And our children are 4 times more likely to become alcoholics themselves.
Wow. Interesting. Talk about the energy being in the realm.
Right. And this is the elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about. I even think about the old Dick Van Dyke Show. I'm dating myself a little bit. Where they'd have a party and the drunk would be in the corner with a lampshade on his head. And this is where we try to make fun of something that makes us feel uncomfortable, or we just don't talk about it. And one of the reasons I have, I'm doing the work that I'm doing is because I don't want anyone to ever feel as alone as I did.
Yeah.
And I consider my experience to be the Bermuda Triangle of experience with this, because I grew up around it. It's in my family. I numbed my own pain for years through drugs and alcohol. And I'm married to alcoholics. So I know about numbing our pain through alcohol, drugs, work, projects.
So quick question. How has your family responded to your book, to your work, to your coaching programs? At
the long end of my arm.
Sorry to hear that.
It's very interesting, because I grew up, as many of us did, with the unwritten rule of we don't talk about these things. However, it's beyond me. It's beyond the family, because there's so many people that are out there that need help.
Yeah. So that would just be another attachment to your ego if you didn't do this work because of worrying about what your family or anybody thought. That would keep you very small.
And it held me back for a while. One of the things that really inspired me was Patrick Kennedy of the Kennedy family. Came out with his book a number of years ago, and I watched an interview with he and his cousin Maria Shriver. And he went through some of the same things. And there are certain family members who still don't want to talk about, or still don't want to, well, first of all, talk about it or talk with him. And it's really a shame when we can't look at this as an opportunity for the whole family to heal.
Right.
To finally step out of the denial that we've all been living in and just say, you know what? We had some pretty sucky years. How do we want to make it better going forward, rather than, again, denying some of the things that happened or didn't happen?
Right.
And it's just a question of, do we want to make something better for ourselves collectively as a family and begin to heal this, or not?
Right. And that amazingly powerful piece of taking personal responsibility for your part in it as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think to me, that's one of the biggest parts of the healing process is just that, like you talked about as well, that simple ownership of here's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
It's not making it all right. It's not saying it's okay. It's just saying, yep, you hear just the facts, right? Just the facts, ma'am.
Yeah.
Here's what happened.
And making amends where we can. And sometimes the other person doesn't want to hear it, because this is where we sometimes identify by our stories, and we want to feel the anger. We don't want to let go of it. And I was there for many, many years. However, that just fuels the poison within our body. So it's really a question of, all right, this is the way things were. I'm not happy, but I can't change 5 minutes ago, let alone 30 years ago.
Right.
So how do we want to be from now moving forward with the rest of our lives and the rest of this time we have? And one of the things that I talk with about my clients, and I talk with about friends as well, is we chose this lifetime. We chose this life before we came into it.
Exactly. So and I love how you ask the question, how do I want to be? What do I want to make better? And I think that's such an important place to go to, is asking ourselves that question. Oh, so good. Stephanie, before we sign off, what's new in your life? You got anything? You mentioned a little something. We were doing a pre-chat about a possible move or something fun.
Yes. I am moving to Santa Fe, New Mexico. My house is
I love it there.
Jersey.
I love
Yes.
it there.
The mountains, I was out there in March, and as I was flying away, I just heard this message of the mountains are calling you. And I felt something deep within my gut. And I've been wanting to move from the East Coast for a while, and just wasn't sure when and where. And now I feel like it's going to happen.
Santa Fe is amazing. I love that you're listening to your intuition. I love that. Way to go.
My intuition gives me amazing messages all the time. And it took me coming back to trusting myself to tap back into it.
Right. That's always the case.
Yeah,
just listen.
It's beautiful. Yes.
Well, thank you for your work. Thank you for your courage and being willing to be real and raw and very authentic. We'll have all your links on our show notes. But just one more time, if you could shout out your website so that people can find you who are interested.
Yes, it's StephanieBMcAuliffe.com.
And that's McAuliffe. Okay, great. Yes. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. And you're just such a prize human. The work that you're doing is incredible and so important.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Yes.
Hey, thanks for jamming with us today. And if you enjoy Illumination Podcast, please go ahead and share it with someone you love. Give us a rating, review, download our podcast. And remember, you can find us at illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. Talk to you soon. Namaste.